Tanisha Talks Tea, where we dive into authentic conversations about ourselves and our community, exploring topics that uplift and inspire us. From personal growth to social change. So grab your teacup and get ready to join the conversation.
so much so that they locked down the whole court and pushed everybody across the street. The guards said that they've never seen anything like it.
For you, now that it's all over, how does this feel?
You know what? I feel like, as Cassie's attorney said, I wanted to leap forward for society. Instead, we got a small little motion forward. But you know what? When you look at victims of abuse, when you look at survivors, when you look at what abuse is, it is going to be a long road to fix what is rotten in society. So you know what? The work continues. I know my followers and people that are advocates, the work continues. And one day we actually will get to a point where the next time a Sean Diddy Combs comes into the court, they are held accountable.
Tisa, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, too.
And thank you for joining us. For even more on the Diddy trial, make sure you follow our podcast, Bad Rap, the Case Against Diddy, hosted by our very own Brian Buckmeyer, wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm Eva Pilgrim in New York. Have a good rest of your day.
Sippers, we are going to go over to TMZ and sip some tea on Diddy. Remember, when you come into the room, to drop some teacups in the chat. Let me know where you stand on the Diddy verdict, him being denial, and whatever side you're on, drop your standing in the chat.
Was a monumental loss for prosecutors in the Diddy case. They were, I wish there were a bigger word than the word losers, because that's what they are. This case would never have been brought if the only issues were whether he transported a sex worker across state lines to have sex. There is no way they would have done it. I mean, you look at this case, and they had 70 Homeland Security agents at Diddy's homes in Miami and LA. And they spent a fortune putting this case together. And what did they get? A not guilty verdict on racketeering, a not guilty verdict on sex trafficking as it relates to Cassie, a not guilty verdict on sex trafficking as it relates to Jane. Those were the reasons why this case was brought. They said he was a racketeer. The jury said no. They said that he was raping Cassie and coercing Cassie and Jane and forcing to these freak-offs. The jury didn't buy it. Now again, I wasn't in the courtroom, nor were you. I mean, you got to see the witnesses, see the evidence. And the jury not only was not buying it, but now that we look at it, remember, an hour into this case, an hour into deliberations, the jury came back to the judge and said one of the jurors, juror 25, was not following jury instructions. What really stunned me about that is that it was the holdout. Felt one way, he felt another way. And they did that within an hour. And he obviously came around, it seemed. This didn't seem a difficult decision for the jury. It seems like they were pretty much in agreement on the first straw vote. So did the prosecution prove its case? No. Yes, he was found guilty on the Mann Act, 2 counts. But again, this is an antiquated law. Let me just explain the Mann Act. That if Diddy had taken somebody from the San Fernando Valley, a sex worker, and then brought them over the hill to a hotel in Beverly Hills and paid them, well, that would be solicitation of prostitution. Guess what? The DA wouldn't take a case like that. It'd be a misdemeanor case that the city attorney might file. Generally, they don't. But if they do, it's 6 months, maximum a year in county jail, which they never give. And yet, we are now looking at a prosecution that got 2 convictions of putting a sex worker on an airplane flying to where Diddy was. That's what this case ended up to be. A huge, a monumental loss for prosecutors. And I gotta say that I wanna go back to the news conference the U.S. Attorney had, where the U.S. Attorney spent time talking about baby oil. And when I heard him talking about baby oil, I'm just thinking, what does this have to do with a federal prosecution? Yes, it's salacious, but what does it have to do with 70 Homeland Security agents? Now, look, and I'm not saying Cassie wasn't abused. We know she was abused. We saw the Intercontinental Hotel video, but he wasn't being prosecuted for that. And to say, and I have talked about this from the beginning, to say this dude was a racketeer, he's a bad guy, and I think a criminal. He's committed a lot of crimes along the way. But a racketeer, and again, I will say this one more time, a racketeer is somebody in organized crime. This was disorganized crime. This was a jealous, crazy, even criminal boyfriend who is so crazed that burglarize Kid Cudi's house, or maybe blow up the car and kidnap somebody and give them a lie detector test. But there's no enterprise. It's not Bad Boy Records. That's not what Bad Boy Records was doing. It was a crazed boyfriend who was doing this. That's not organized crime. And clearly, the jury saw that. And they came back unanimously on it. So what do we end up with? We end up with a case that, if it was all within one state, would have been maximum a misdemeanor in the city attorney's office. Just think about that. So now the question, what was really behind this? Maybe the prosecutors really believed in their case, but I question that news conference where, they decided it's not just that we're going to file a case against him, we're going to have a whole big news conference laying out all the evidence, talking about the oil and Astroglide and whatnot. And then you got to wonder, was their motivation to seek justice, or was this in part a publicity grab? And I say that because I don't get, A, why they held a news conference, and B, why they're bringing in things like baby oil. I want to say one other thing, that, the jury saw the freak-off videos, and a lot of people thought, oh, that's going to hurt Diddy. I think it's the opposite, because that video doesn't get in the head of Cassie or Jane. They just see them having sex. And, between looking at the video, looking at those text messages saying, when are we going to have the next freak-off? I love these freak-offs. It's possible for sure that there were times when they didn't, but the jury wasn't buying that he coerced them. They just weren't buying it, because it's complicated when they're in long relationships with Diddy. So I'm not saying they weren't abused, but the prosecution, to file a case like this, to spend this kind of money, to invest the resources they did, they got to know going in that there's a chance they can prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. It seems this jury had no problem finding him not guilty on the main count. Now, as for what's going to happen to him, whether he's going to get significant prison time, I don't know. I just don't think so. Because ultimately, do you put a guy in prison because he hired a sex worker and flew him on an airplane? Do you put him in prison for 10 years? I don't think so. Do you put him in prison for 5 years? I don't think so. Now, you could say, well, we're going to put him in prison because he's just a bad guy. But that's not what the law says. The law doesn't say you can look at a guy and say, he's just a bad guy, so we're going to throw the book at him. That's wrong. That's wrong. They did that with O.J. Simpson in that kidnapping case in Las Vegas. And even though I covered the O.J. Simpson murder cases, the civil and criminal, and knew he was guilty. The kidnapping case was BS. And yet, the judge threw the book at him as a pound of flesh because he was found not guilty in the murder case. That wasn't fair. That wasn't right. And you can't look at the guy and say, I just dislike him so much that I'm going to do what I might not do if he were a different guy. You got to apply the law fairly. And I just don't see him getting significant prison time. I may be wrong, but this Mann Act is an antiquated law. It was used for racial purposes initially. And it's no different from, going after a John on Hollywood Boulevard, which is a misdemeanor case. It's transporting a sex worker. So I just don't see significant time here. Bottom line here, the prosecution may have convicted him on the Mann Act, but they lost this case in a spectacular way.
All right, my kids got me doing smoke bombs on the porch, y'all. So that was TMZ chiming in, everything we've gone over since we started first listening to the beginning of the trial starting. I want to first and foremost say I would never, ever victim shame, blame, hate, or do anything to try to gain off of a victim's pain. It's unfortunate. Like I said, I wish to God maybe the feds would have started investigating Diddy in the 90s. They probably would have had a case against him that could land him in prison for a while. Unfortunately, this was not the case. They did get Diddy on a conviction of the transport of 304. So we're going to, continue to do our sipping to tea of Diddy, okay? And definitely come up here, and talk all things Diddy when necessary, or, whatever we want to do as far as sip tea on Diddy's life. So let's go ahead and now segue over to Trump. Okay, Trump passed the big, beautiful bill. Let's look at what that looks like, okay? The big, beautiful bill was something that Trump introduced maybe last year, and let mommy work, okay? And so, Ella, what are you doing? Y'all come inside till I get done. Close my door. Okay, my kids are ready to pop their fireworks. It's not quite dark yet. Okay, so anyway, we are, segueing into Trump passing the big, beautiful bill. Okay, we got introduced to this like last year or something like that, where, people were saying it was like 1,000 pages, 1,000 pages of essentially like a reform of rights for minorities. That's not what I'm seeing. Thank God. Okay, I'm sure that there's probably some rhetoric and something somewhere that would allude to that. Thankfully, that's not what I'm seeing. But let's get into it, okay? Trump's big, beautiful bill. Remember, like, subscribe, drop your stop, Eladora.
Well, it took a marathon all-night session, but House Republicans have passed President Trump's $4.5 trillion domestic agenda.
The measure extends significant tax cuts and dramatically slashes safety net programs like Medicaid. KTLA's Carlos Salcedo joins us from the newsroom with more. Carlos.
Cher, Rick, good evening. Now, there were a few Republican holdouts which delayed the bill's final passage. In the end, only 2 GOP members voted against the mega bill. Now, this gives the president his first major legislative win of his second term, but it didn't come without pushback from Democrats. They were unified in their opposition.
The motion is adopted.
President Trump's big, beautiful bill got a buoyant reception by House Republicans after its final passage in the chamber Thursday, overcoming multiple last-minute setbacks.
Mr. Speaker, that's not America. We're better than that.
Thanks for watching. Remember to show your support by liking, subscribing, and sharing. It's a blessing. Keep your teacups filled and ready for my next upload. Until then, stay inspired and remember, always stay Thanks for watching. Remember to show your support by liking, subscribing, and sharing. It's a blessing. Keep your teacups filled and ready for my next upload. Until then, stay inspired and remember, always stay dipping.